In a small, quiet town in the southern United States, life moved at its own pace. The streets were lined with old oak trees, and the air carried the faint scent of blooming magnolias during spring. But beneath this picturesque charm lay deep-rooted divisions, ones that had festered for generations. The town was sharply divided along racial lines, and tensions simmered just below the surface. At the center of it all stood the police department, an institution long accused of favoring one group over another. For years, the town's residents whispered about the unfair treatment they received from officers. Black families complained of being pulled over without reason, their cars searched repeatedly under vague pretenses. Young men talked about being followed by patrol cars simply because they walked home late at night. Mothers worried when their sons left the house, fearing what might happen if they crossed paths with certain officers. These stories weren't rare, they were part of everyday life. And while some people tried to ignore the problem, others grew more vocal, demanding change. It was against this backdrop that Marcus Johnson arrived. Tall, broad-shouldered, and with a calm demeanor, Marcus was no stranger to adversity. Born and raised in the very neighborhood he now served, he had grown up watching his father struggle to provide for their family, despite facing constant discrimination. His mother worked 2 jobs to make ends meet, often reminding her son that education and hard work could open doors that seemed impossible to unlock. Inspired by her words, Marcus pursued a career in law enforcement, not because he loved authority, but because he wanted to challenge it from within. Marcus joined the police force 20 years ago, starting as a rookie officer eager to prove himself. Over time, he earned respect through his dedication and fairness. He became known for de-escalating tense situations, treating everyone, regardless of race or background, with dignity. His colleagues admired his professionalism, though not everyone appreciated his outspoken nature. When Marcus spoke out against biased practices within the department, he faced resistance. Some officers dismissed him as too idealistic, while others accused him of stirring trouble. Yet Marcus refused to back down. He believed that true justice wasn't about power. It was about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Now, after decades of service, Marcus found himself standing on the steps of the police station, ready to take on the biggest challenge of his life. He had been appointed as the town's first black police chief, a milestone that filled many with hope but also stirred resentment among others. News of his promotion spread quickly, sparking heated debates across the community. Supporters praised the decision, calling it a step toward equality. Critics, however, saw it as a threat to the status quo. Among them was Officer Greg Turner, a man whose reputation preceded him. Greg Turner was a veteran cop with 30 years on the force. Known for his gruff voice and intimidating presence, Turner prided himself on maintaining order. To him, policing meant toughness, no excuses, no leniency. Over the years, he had built a loyal following within the department, particularly among white officers who shared his views. They respected his methods, even when those methods crossed ethical boundaries. Turner had a history of targeting minority communities during traffic stops and arrests, often citing minor infractions as justification. His superiors rarely questioned his actions, turning a blind eye to complaints filed against him. When news of Marcus's appointment reached Turner, he reacted with thinly veiled hostility. Sitting in the break room one morning, coffee mug in hand, Turner muttered under his breath, "They think putting a token in charge will fix everything? Ridiculous." His fellow officers exchanged uneasy glances. Some nodded in agreement, emboldened by Turner's confidence. Others stayed silent, unwilling to voice support, yet hesitant to challenge him. Word of Turner's comments reached Marcus, but he chose not to engage. Instead, he focused on preparing for his new role, knowing full well that proving himself wouldn't be easy. As Marcus settled into his office, he couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were watching him, some curious, others judgmental. Every decision he made would be scrutinized, every misstep magnified. Still, he remained undeterred. For Marcus, this wasn't just about personal success, it was about paving the way for future generations. If he succeeded, perhaps others like him would find it easier to rise through the ranks. perhaps the town, could finally begin healing. But little did Marcus know the challenges ahead would test him in ways he couldn't imagine. Within weeks of taking office, an incident would occur that would thrust him into the national spotlight, forcing the entire town to confront uncomfortable truths. It would reveal not only the depth of prejudice embedded within the system, but also the courage required to stand up against it. For now, though, Marcus focused on building bridges, meeting with community leaders, and listening to concerns. Change wouldn't come overnight, but Marcus was determined to plant the seeds. Marcus Johnson had always believed in leading by example. As the new police chief, he knew his actions would speak louder than any speeches or promises. So, on a chilly Thursday evening, Marcus decided to step out of his office and into the field. He wanted to see for himself how officers interacted with the community when they thought no one important was watching. It wasn't about catching anyone doing something wrong. It was about understanding the realities faced by both citizens and law enforcement. Dressed in plain clothes, a dark jacket, jeans, and sturdy boots, Marcus slipped out of the station, unnoticed. He climbed into an unmarked sedan parked near the back entrance. The car blended seamlessly with others on the road, its lack of flashing lights or decals making it almost invisible. For Marcus, this anonymity was crucial. He needed to experience the streets as an ordinary citizen would, not as someone wearing a badge. The night air was crisp and the streets were quiet. Most people were indoors, settling down after long days at work or school. Marcus drove slowly through neighborhoods, observing everything around him. Streetlights cast faint glows onto sidewalks where children's toys lay abandoned. Empty parking lots stretched alongside closed shops, their windows reflecting the moonlight. Occasionally, a dog barked in the distance, breaking the stillness. Around midnight, Marcus pulled into the parking lot of a small convenience store tucked away on the edge of town. The neon sign above the door flickered slightly, buzzing softly in the cool air. Inside, fluorescent lights illuminated shelves stocked with snacks, drinks, and household essentials. Marcus stepped out of his car, stretching his legs before heading inside. He grabbed a cup of coffee from the counter, nodding politely at the cashier who smiled warmly in return. As Marcus walked back toward his car, sipping his coffee, he noticed headlights approaching in his peripheral vision. At first, he didn't think much of it, until the vehicle slowed down dramatically behind him. Glancing over his shoulder, Marcus saw a marked police cruiser pull up close, its tires crunching against the gravel. Confused, he turned fully to face the car, wondering why he was being stopped. Officer Greg Turner stepped out of the cruiser, his hand resting casually on the grip of his holstered gun. His uniform was immaculate, his posture rigid, exuding authority. Without hesitation, Turner barked orders, his voice sharp and commanding. "Stop right there, hands where I can see them," he shouted, taking a few steps forward. Marcus froze, startled but calm. He held his coffee cup in one hand, raising the other slightly to show he meant no harm. "Officer," he said evenly, "is there a problem?" Turner ignored the question, his eyes narrowing suspiciously. "Who are you?" he demanded, his tone harsh. "What are you doing here? This is private property." "I'm just grabbing some coffee," Marcus replied, gesturing toward the convenience store. "I live nearby." Turner wasn't satisfied. He took another step closer, his gaze sweeping over Marcus's casual attire. "You don't look like you belong around here," he sneered, his words laced with thinly veiled disdain. "Do you have ID?" Marcus felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He recognized Turner instantly, the same man whose comments about his appointment had reached his ears weeks earlier. Though he tried to stay composed, the situation was escalating quickly. "I do," Marcus said carefully, reaching into his jacket pocket. "But let me explain." "Don't move!" Turner snapped, cutting him off mid-sentence. His hand moved instinctively to his holster, fingers brushing against the butt of his weapon. "Keep your hands visible." Marcus obeyed, raising both arms slowly. "Officer Turner," he said firmly, "you need to listen to me. I'm Chief Marcus Johnson." Turner scoffed, disbelief etched across his face. "Chief Johnson?" he repeated mockingly. Yeah, right. You expect me to believe that? I'm serious, Marcus insisted, keeping his voice steady despite the rising tension. Check my badge if you don't believe me. It's clipped inside my jacket. But Turner wasn't listening. His expression hardened, anger flaring in his eyes. Nice try, he spat. We get guys like you all the time, posing as cops, thinking you can fool us. He stepped even closer, his body language aggressive. Let me make this clear. You're not walking away until I know exactly who you are. By now, a small crowd had begun gathering. A young couple exiting the store paused to watch, their faces filled with concern. Another man leaned against a nearby car, filming the encounter on his phone. Someone shouted from the sidelines, "That is Chief Johnson." But Turner dismissed the comment, his focus unwavering. The seconds dragged on like hours. Marcus could feel his pulse quickening, though he refused to let fear show. He locked eyes with Turner, speaking deliberately. Officer Turner, I am asking you, one professional to another, to lower your weapon and verify my identity. You're making a mistake. Turner hesitated, his jaw tightening. For a brief moment, doubt flickered across his features. But then, his pride kicked in. Rather than backing down, he doubled down, gripping his gun tightly. If you're really who you say you are, prove it, he growled. Otherwise, shut up and cooperate. The standoff continued, each second charged with tension. Marcus remained motionless, his mind racing. He knew better than to provoke Turner further. Doing so could escalate the situation dangerously. Yet, he couldn't shake the irony of the moment. Here he was, the newly appointed police chief tasked with reforming the very system that was now turning against him. Finally, the sound of another patrol car pulling into the lot broke the stalemate. Backup had arrived. 2 officers emerged, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock as they recognized Marcus. One of them called out, "Chief Johnson, is that you?" "Yes," Marcus replied, relief washing over him. "Thank you for coming." The arrival of additional officers forced Turner to reconsider his position. Reluctantly, he lowered his weapon, though his scowl deepened. His colleagues approached cautiously, exchanging worried glances. One of them addressed Turner directly. "What's going on here, Greg? Why did you draw your gun?" Turner stammered, struggling to justify his actions. He looked suspicious," he muttered lamely. "I didn't know who he was." The "me" explanation sounded hollow, even to his own ears. Meanwhile, Marcus stood silently, allowing the scene to unfold. He didn't need to say anything. The evidence spoke for itself. The crowd murmured among themselves, shaking their heads in disbelief. Phones clicked and recorded, capturing every detail of the confrontation. Word of the incident spread like wildfire. By morning, screenshots of the video footage flooded social media platforms, accompanied by hashtags like "Justice for Marcus" and "End Police Brutality." Local news stations picked up the story, airing clips of the tense exchange. Residents debated, passionately, some defending Turner's actions while others condemned them outright. Civil rights organizations issued statements calling for accountability, vowing to hold the department responsible. Back at the station, tempers flared as details of the incident came to light. Officers split into factions, with some siding with Turner and others supporting Marcus. The rift exposed deeper divisions within the force, highlighting systemic issues that had long gone unaddressed. City officials scrambled to contain the day. Fallout, aware that public trust in law enforcement hung precariously in the balance. For Marcus, the night was far from over. As he returned to his office, exhausted but resolute, he reflected on what had transpired. The encounter with Turner had been humiliating, yes, but it also served as a stark reminder of why change was necessary. Racism wasn't just an abstract concept. It was real, tangible, and capable of putting lives at risk. And though the road ahead promised to be difficult, Marcus knew he couldn't afford to give up. Little did he realize, however, that this was only the beginning. The events of that night would set off a chain reaction, forcing the entire town to confront uncomfortable truths about race, power, and justice. What happened next would test everyone involved, and redefine the meaning of leadership in ways no one could have anticipated. The morning after the confrontation at the convenience store, Marcus Johnson woke up to a storm. Not the kind that rumbles in the sky, but one that brewed on social media, news channels, and street corners across the town. Overnight, the incident had become national news. Videos of Turner pointing his gun at Marcus flooded platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Hashtags like #Justice for Marcus, Need Accountability Now, and #End Racism in Law Enforcement trended. Nationwide, people were outraged, demanding answers and consequences for Officer Greg Turner's actions. As Marcus sat in his office, scrolling through the endless stream of posts and comments, he felt a mix of emotions. There was anger, of course, anger at how quickly Turner had escalated the situation, anger at the blatant prejudice behind it all. But there was also sadness. Sadness that such an encounter could happen to anyone, let alone someone wearing the same uniform as the aggressor. And then there was resolve. Resolve to ensure this moment wasn't wasted, that it would spark real change instead of fading into another forgotten headline. Outside the station, protests began forming. Dozens of residents gathered in front of the police department, holding signs that read "Black Lives Matter" and "No Justice, No Peace." Some chanted Marcus's name, while others called for Turner's immediate dismissal. Among the crowd were young activists, seasoned civil rights leaders, and ordinary citizens who simply wanted fairness. Mothers held their children close, explaining why they were protesting. Teenagers recorded speeches on their phones, sharing them online to amplify the message. The energy was electric, a mix of frustration, hope, and determination. Inside the station, tensions ran just as high. Officers whispered in hallways, dividing themselves into two camps. One group supported Marcus, acknowledging that Turner's behavior was unacceptable. They saw the incident as proof that reforms were long overdue. The other group rallied around Turner, dismissing the backlash as overblown. He didn't mean any harm, some argued. How was he supposed to know? It was the chief. Others claimed Marcus should have identified himself sooner, shifting blame onto him despite the clear power imbalance. City officials scrambled to respond. The mayor called an emergency meeting with the police commission, urging them to take swift action. "This isn't just about one officer," she said during the closed-door session. Item 1. The days following the incident felt like living in two worlds at once. Outside, the protest grew louder and more organized. Inside the police station, an uneasy silence hung over the hallways. Officers avoided eye contact, unsure of what to say or how to act. The weight of public scrutiny pressed down on everyone, but none felt it more than Marcus Johnson. As the newly appointed police chief, he was caught between his duty to lead and his need to heal. Not just himself, but the fractured community he served. City officials wasted no time launching an internal investigation. An independent oversight committee was formed, composed of legal experts, civil rights advocates, and retired law enforcement professionals from neighboring towns. Their task was clear: examine every detail of the confrontation between Marcus and Officer Greg Turner, determine whether protocol had been violated, and recommend appropriate action. It was a process designed to be transparent, but skepticism lingered. Many residents doubted that the committee could remain impartial, fearing that old loyalties within the department might sway the outcome. Meanwhile, Marcus cooperated fully with the investigation. He handed over his unmarked car's dashcam footage, which captured the tense moments leading up to Turner's arrival. He provided statements recounting the events calmly and factually, avoiding any language that might inflame emotions further. His demeanor reflected his commitment to fairness, even toward those who had wronged him. Still, the emotional toll was undeniable. Friends noticed dark circles under his eyes, and colleagues remarked on how much quieter he seemed during meetings. Turner, on the other hand, dug in his heels. When summoned for questioning, he arrived flanked by a lawyer refusing to answer questions without legal counsel present. During interviews, he defended his actions, insisting that he had followed proper procedure. "How was I supposed to know it was the chief?" he repeated, his tone defiant. He wasn't wearing a uniform and his badge wasn't visible. Any officer would have acted the same way. But body cam footage told a different story. The video showed Turner ignoring Marcus's attempts to identify himself, dismissing his explanations outright. It also captured Turner's use of racial slurs, words that sent shockwaves through the community when they were revealed. For many, this was the smoking gun proving what they had suspected all along. Turner's behavior wasn't just reckless, it was rooted in prejudice. As evidence mounted against him, support for Turner began to crumble, even among his closest allies. Some officers distanced themselves publicly, issuing statements condemning his actions while reaffirming their dedication to reform. Others remained loyal, but quietly admitted that Turner had gone too far this time. "He's always been tough," one colleague confided to investigators. "But this crosses a line." After weeks of deliberation, the Oversight Committee released its findings. The report was damning. It concluded that Turner had engaged in gross misconduct, violating multiple departmental policies. Specifically, he had failed to de-escalate the situation, used excessive force by drawing his weapon unnecessarily, and demonstrated bias through racially charged language. Based on these findings, the committee recommended immediate termination of Turner's employment, as well as criminal charges for unlawful use of a firearm and hate speech. When the decision was announced, reactions were mixed. Supporters of Marcus cheered, celebrating the victory as a step toward accountability. Protesters outside the station erupted into applause, chanting, "No more racism," and "Justice is served." Local activists hailed the ruling as a turning point, urging other cities to adopt similar measures to hold officers accountable. However, not everyone agreed. Turner's defenders argued that firing him was too harsh, claiming the punishment didn't fit the crime. They pointed out that Marcus hadn't been physically harmed and questioned whether the entire ordeal warranted such drastic consequences. "It was a mistake," one former colleague insisted. "Does one bad decision really mean the end of a 30-year career?" For Marcus, the outcome brought little satisfaction. While he appreciated the efforts of the Oversight Committee, he knew that removing one problematic officer wouldn't solve the deeper issues plaguing the department or the town. Racism wasn't confined to individuals. It was embedded in systems, policies, and attitudes that had persisted for generations. Firing Turner was necessary, yes, but it was only the beginning. Determined to seize the momentum, Marcus proposed sweeping reforms aimed at addressing systemic inequities. First, he introduced mandatory anti-bias training for all officers, emphasizing empathy, cultural competence, and conflict resolution. Next, he implemented stricter accountability measures, including random audits of body cam footage and anonymous reporting channels for citizens to file complaints. Finally, he established a civilian review board tasked with overseeing police activities and ensuring transparency. These changes sparked heated debates both inside and outside the department. Some praised Marcus's vision, calling him a trailblazer who dared to challenge entrenched norms. Others accused him of overreach, warning that his reforms would undermine morale and erode trust between officers. Tensions simmered, threatening to boil over at any moment. Turner, meanwhile, refused to go quietly. Stripped of his badge and facing criminal charges, he became increasingly vocal about his grievances. In interviews with local media, he painted himself as a victim of political correctness, accusing Marcus of orchestrating a witch hunt. "This isn't about justice," he declared bitterly. "It's about revenge." His comments fueled conspiracy theories among his supporters, who vowed to fight back against what they saw as an attack on traditional policing. Despite the backlash, Marcus remained steadfast. He understood that change often came with resistance, especially when it challenged deeply held beliefs. What mattered most was staying true to his mission, creating a safer, fairer town for everyone. Still, the threats against him grew harder to ignore. Anonymous letters arrived at his home, filled with venomous messages. Rumors circulated about retaliation plots orchestrated by Turner's allies. Even his family urged caution, worried about his safety. One evening, As Marcus sat alone in his office reviewing policy drafts, he allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The past few weeks had tested him in ways he never imagined. Yet through it all, he had discovered something unexpected. Strength. Not the kind that comes from physical power or authority, but the quiet resilience born of conviction. He thought about the young activists marching in the streets, the mothers holding signs demanding better futures for their children, and the elders sharing stories of struggles overcome. Their courage inspired him to keep pushing forward, no matter how daunting the obstacles. Outside his window, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Somewhere beyond the station walls, life continued. People laughed, argued, dreamed, and hoped. Marcus reminded himself why he had chosen this path, to give those dreams a chance to flourish. Though the road ahead promised challenges, he believed progress was possible if people worked together. And so Marcus turned back to his desk, penning notes for the next phase of reform. The battle wasn't over, but neither was his determination. Change took time, patience, and unwavering resolve. For now, he focused on planting seeds of justice, equality, and hope. Months turned into a year since the night officer Greg Turner pointed his gun at Marcus Johnson, unaware that he was confronting the very man who now led the police department. The town had changed in ways both visible and subtle. Streetlights shone brighter in neighborhoods once neglected. Graffiti-covered walls were painted with vibrant murals celebrating diversity, and community gardens bloomed where empty lots used to sit. These changes weren't just cosmetic. They symbolized hope, resilience, and the possibility of renewal. Marcus Johnson stood on the steps of the newly renovated police station, looking out at a crowd gathered for the unveiling of a memorial plaque. It read, "In pursuit of justice, honoring those who believe in change." Behind him, officers mingled with residents, sharing laughter and stories. Children chased bubbles blown by volunteers, their giggles filling the air. For so long, this space had been a source of fear and division. Now, it felt like a place of connection, a testament to what could happen when people worked together. The journey hadn't been easy. Even after Turner's firing, resistance lingered. Some disgruntled officers transferred to other departments, while others quietly retired rather than adapt to the new policies. Civil lawsuits filed by Turner's supporters accused Marcus of overreach, though none gained traction in court. Anonymous threats continued to trickle in, forcing Marcus to remain vigilant. Yet he never wavered. Each challenge only strengthened his resolve to create lasting change. One of the most significant victories came not from within the police force, but from the community itself. The civilian review board Marcus had established proved instrumental in rebuilding trust. Composed of teachers, pastors, business owners, and activists, the board reviewed complaints against officers, ensured transparency in investigations, and recommended additional reforms. Their presence reassured residents that accountability wasn't just a promise, it was a reality. At the same time, Marcus introduced programs aimed at addressing systemic issues beyond policing. He partnered with local schools to implement mentorship initiatives, pairing students with officers who served as role models. Counseling services expanded to include trauma-informed care for victims of crime and even for officers themselves. Community centers hosted workshops on conflict resolution, financial literacy, and job training, empowering residents to break cycles of poverty and violence. These efforts didn't solve every problem overnight, but they planted seeds of opportunity where despair had taken root. Turner, meanwhile, faded into obscurity. After failing to rally widespread support for his cause, he retreated from public life. Rumors circulated about him working odd jobs outside of town, struggling to adjust to life without the authority he once wielded. Occasionally, someone spotted him at a gas station or grocery store, his face lined with bitterness, but few paid him much attention. The town had moved on, leaving him behind. For Marcus, the true measure of progress lay in everyday moments, the small interactions that revealed deeper shifts. One evening, as he walked through the park near his home, he noticed a group of teenagers playing basketball under floodlights. Among them was Jamal, the boy who had thanked him months earlier. This time, Jamal waved enthusiastically, calling out, "Hey, Chief, want to join us?" Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. "I think I'll leave the game to you pros," he replied. But as he watched them play, he couldn't help but smile. These were the faces of the future, kids unburdened by the prejudices of the past, dreaming bigger dreams because they believed in a fairer world. Back at the station, Detective Sarah Hayes approached Marcus with a folder in hand. "Got something for you," she said, her tone light but serious. Inside were reports showing a steady decline in use of force incidents and citizen complaints. "Looks like your reforms are paying off." Marcus nodded, pride flickering across his face. "It's not my success, it's ours. Everyone here played a part." Hayes grinned, clapping him on the shoulder before heading back to her desk. Moments like these reminded Marcus why he'd chosen this path. Leadership wasn't about standing above others, it was about lifting them up. Still, challenges remained. Crime hadn't disappeared entirely, and some residents still harbored doubts about whether real change was possible. Economic disparities persisted, casting long shadows over pockets of prosperity. And yet there was momentum, a sense that the town was moving in the right direction. People talked less about blame and more about solutions. Conversations that once ended in shouting matches now concluded with handshakes, or at least mutual understanding. On weekends, Marcus often visited his childhood neighborhood, the same streets where he'd grown up watching his father struggle against systemic racism. Things looked different now. Houses once marked by neglect were freshly painted, gardens bursting with flowers. Kids rode bikes down sidewalks lined with trees, their laughter echoing in the crisp air. An elderly woman sitting on her porch waved as he passed, calling out, "You did good, Chief. You made us proud." Those words stayed with Marcus long after he returned home. They reminded him of why he'd fought so hard, to honor the sacrifices of those who came before him, and to pave the way for those who would follow. His mother's voice echoed in his mind. Education and hard work can open doors. She had been right, but so had his father, who taught him that courage meant standing firm even when the odds seemed insurmountable. As winter gave way to spring, Marcus found himself reflecting on the lessons learned during this tumultuous year. He realized that justice wasn't a destination. It was a journey, one that required constant effort, humility, and faith in humanity's capacity for growth. Mistakes would be made, setbacks would occur, but each step forward mattered. Together, they were building something stronger, kinder, and more resilient. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus sat on his porch sipping coffee. The sky blazed orange and pink, painting the rooftops in warm hues. Across the street, a young girl practiced cartwheels on her front lawn, her giggles carrying on the breeze. Nearby, two neighbors chatted over a fence, sharing gardening tips. Life moved on, simple and beautiful in its ordinariness. Marcus leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment. He thought about the road ahead, about the work still left to do and the battles yet to be fought. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, he felt hopeful. Change took time, patience, and unwavering determination. And though the scars of the past would always remain, they no longer defined the town. What mattered was how they chose to move forward, together. When he opened his eyes again, the stars had begun to appear, dotting the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and a car engine hummed softly as it passed by. Life went on, quiet and steady. And for Marcus Johnson, that was enough. The weeks following Greg Turner's firing and the announcement of criminal charges against him marked a turning point for the town, but not in the way everyone had hoped. While some celebrated the decision as a victory for justice, others clung to their grievances, unwilling to let go of old prejudices. The divide between supporters of Marcus Johnson and defenders of Turner deepened, creating an atmosphere of tension that lingered long after the headlines faded. For Marcus, this was both a challenge and an opportunity, a chance to bridge gaps, mend wounds, and rebuild trust within the community. Change didn't come easily. Even with Turner gone, remnants of his influence remained. Some officers still harbored resentment toward Marcus, viewing his reforms as unnecessary interference. Conversations in locker rooms turned into heated arguments about the good old days versus this new agenda. Morale dipped as stricter accountability measures were enforced. Body cam footage audits revealed instances of misconduct that had previously gone unnoticed, leading to disciplinary actions that further alienated certain members of the force. Outside the department, skepticism persisted among residents. Many black families welcomed the reforms, but remained cautious, unsure if they signaled genuine progress or merely temporary appeasement. White residents split along ideological lines. Some embraced the changes as overdue, while others resisted, fearing they would undermine law enforcement's effectiveness. Protests continued sporadically, with activists calling for even bolder steps, like reallocating police funding to social services. Meanwhile, Turner's most ardent supporters organized counter-protests, waving American flags and chanting slogans about protecting tradition. Amidst the chaos, Marcus worked tirelessly to keep moving forward. He knew that rebuilding trust required more than policies. It demanded dialogue, empathy, and shared understanding. To foster these connections, he launched a series of community forums called listening circles. Held in local libraries, churches, and schools, these events brought together residents from all walks of life to discuss issues affecting the town. Moderators ensured discussions stayed respectful, encouraging participants to share personal stories rather than resorting to accusations. At first, attendance was sparse. People were hesitant, unsure whether their voices would truly be heard. But gradually, curiosity gave way to courage. One evening, a young mother stood up during a listening circle, her voice trembling but determined. "My son is only 10 years old," she said, clutching a photo of her smiling child. "But already I worry every time he leaves the house. Will someone see him as a threat because of the color of his skin? Will he make it home safely?" Her words struck a chord, prompting nods of agreement from others in the room. Another participant, an elderly white man, spoke next. "I grew up here," he admitted, his tone reflective. "And I'll admit, I've made mistakes. I've looked the other way when things weren't right. But hearing stories like yours makes me realize how much work we have to do, to listen, to learn, and to change." These moments of vulnerability became the heart of the listening circles. They reminded everyone that behind the anger and frustration were real people with hopes, fears, and dreams. Slowly but surely, walls began to crumble. Residents who once avoided each other started exchanging pleasantries at grocery stores. Parents volunteered side by side at school fundraisers. Neighbors helped one another mow lawns and fix leaky faucets. Small acts of kindness added up, planting seeds of unity where division had taken root. Within the police department, Marcus focused on fostering a culture of accountability and compassion. He invited mental health professionals to conduct workshops on stress management and emotional intelligence, teaching officers how to handle high-pressure situations without resorting to aggression. He also partnered with local organizations to provide resources for at-risk youth, aiming to address underlying causes of crime rather than simply punishing offenders. These initiatives weren't universally embraced. Some officers grumbled about touchy-feely nonsense, but over time attitudes began to shift. One officer, a veteran named Detective Sarah Hayes, emerged as an unexpected ally. Initially, skeptical of Marcus's reforms, Hayes had kept her distance, preferring to focus on solving cases rather than engaging in what she saw as political posturing. But after attending a listening circle, she found herself deeply moved by the raw honesty of the conversations. She approached Marcus afterward, offering her support. "If you're serious about changing things," she told him, "count me." Hayes became a bridge between Marcus and the rank-and-file officers. She facilitated training sessions, mediated conflicts, and advocated for transparency. Her involvement lent credibility to Marcus's efforts, helping win over skeptics, who respected her no-nonsense approach. Together, they worked to create a department that prioritized service over control. a vision that resonated with many younger officers eager to redefine what it meant to wear a badge. Despite these strides, challenges persisted. Turner, embittered and humiliated, refused to fade quietly into obscurity. From his home on the outskirts of town, he plotted ways to undermine Marcus's authority. He spread rumors through anonymous phone calls and online posts, accusing Marcus of corruption and incompetence. He claimed the reforms were driving qualified officers away, leaving the town vulnerable to crime. Though few took his claims seriously, they planted seeds of doubt in the minds of some residents. Turner's threats extended beyond rhetoric. Late one night, Marcus received a chilling message. "You think you've won, but this isn't over." The note arrived unsigned, slipped under his front door. His wife urged him to report it, but Marcus hesitated. He didn't want to appear weak or paranoid, especially when so much progress depended on projecting strength and stability. Instead, he tightened security around his home and continued his work undeterred. As months passed, the town began to heal, albeit slowly. Crime rates dropped thanks to increased patrols and community outreach programs. Trust between citizens and officers improved, though scars remained. Children played freely in parks where tensions had once simmered. Families gathered for block parties, sharing food and laughter under twinkling string lights. Life wasn't perfect, but it felt lighter, freer. Marcus often reflected on how far they'd come, and how far they still had to go. On quiet evenings, he returned to the convenience store where the confrontation with Turner had occurred. Standing in the same parking lot, he remembered the fear and frustration of that night. Yet now, instead of hostility, he encountered smiles and waves from employees and customers alike. One evening, as he sipped coffee near his unmarked car, a teenager approached him shyly. "Are you Chief Johnson?" the boy asked, clutching a basketball under one arm. "Yes, I am," Marcus replied, smiling warmly. "What's your name?" "Jamal," the boy said, shifting nervously. "I just wanted to say, thank you. My mom says you're making things better here." Marcus felt a lump rise in his throat. He knelt down to Jamal's level, meeting his gaze. "Thank you for saying that, Jamal. And remember, you can always count on us to help keep you safe." As Jamal ran off to join his friends, Marcus stood watching, his heart swelling with hope. Change wasn't easy, nor was it quick, but every small step mattered. Every conversation, every act of kindness, every effort to understand one another brought them closer to a brighter future. And though the road ahead promised obstacles, Marcus believed they could overcome anything, as long as they walked it together.